Welcome in, everyone, to Beyond the Beat with 32 Beat Writers. I'm your host, Zach Heiduk, and today joining me is Kyle Borgognoni of the Fantasy Footballers. Kyle is the editor-in-chief for the Fantasy Footballers, as well as the host of the Footballers DFS and Dynasty podcast. You can also read his written work over at the Ballers website, thefantasyfootballers.com, and find him on Twitter or X at Kyle_Borg. That's B-O-R-G. Kyle, welcome into the show, man.
Zach, thank you for having me. And you guys, you probably don't know I was going to say this, but you guys are my well-kept secret that I give people. And even earlier today, I was talking with a friend, and this podcast is one that I have in my back pocket that we use for the Footballers all the time, in terms of like what y'all put out and the way that you guys aggregate. You save me tons of work. You save me tons of hours for my job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And no, I did not pay you to say that, right? You'll testify to that. So
that'll come later.
Yeah. So I genuinely do appreciate it. We're really excited this year. Yeah, you guys, I've hesitated to say it outright necessarily, but I know our subscribers to our Patreon, and then we released the website in a fuller capacity this year. So we're super excited about that. And anybody who's watching or listening to this, you can go over to the website and subscribe. I just put the ticker down there with the code podcast. You'll get 50% off your first month with that. But yeah, I wanted to have you on the show, Kyle. Your podcast is something that I listen to religiously for the Dynasty show that you run. I'm not as big into DFS, so I don't listen to that a ton, but the Dynasty one is one of my main listens. And yeah, we're having you on today to talk fantasy football, of course, and we're talking specifically Superflex rookie quarterback value. You guys actually just released a show about basically that topic on the Dynasty podcast, so everybody should check that out after watching or listening to this. And then as I was doing research for this, I think you may be the person who's put out the most content regarding this type of thing. There were 3 articles that you posted. I'll just mention one, but the Dynasty Superflex do we overvalue quarterbacks in rookie drafts? And that's the question I have. On the podcast you've been discussing, is that something that we do? So we're hopefully going to figure that out today.
Yeah, I think the best part about fantasy football is everybody is where they're at. They didn't grow up saying this is going to be my job, or, they played with their friends and they figured it out on the fly. And for me, this being my full-time job, I have room to ask really big questions that I don't know the answers to. And I think that's really for me, how I approach fantasy football research is, let me ask a big question, like rookie quarterbacks, do they do this? So I have another article. It's like rookie quarterbacks, do they sustain wide receiver production? I don't know the answer. And so the best part is you let the research answer. Sometimes you will come to a conclusion and you're like, well, there's nothing really there that exciting. But I found from looking at rookie drafts, specifically in dynasty leagues, and the way that people handle them, they think it's super flex. I have to do this. And that's in fantasy football. There's not a strategy that says you have to do this. This will work every single time. There's kind of an ebb and flow. We talk a lot on the main show about staying water, being open to change, and that the NFL changes over time, right? Like, if you played fantasy football 15 years ago and you didn't have Priest Holmes or LaDainian Tomlinson, you were screwed because it was a running back league. But nowadays we have all these other formats and people think, well, with quarterbacks and with rookie quarterbacks, I have to draft them. There is some ways to get different.
Yeah. And that's a struggle that I was actually having a fight with a friend over text about this because you had sparked a conversation. I had listened to the show and I was like, I've been
fights from friends.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, Dan, I don't know. I feel like, this, that, or the other. And he was like, well, he wasn't saying I'm an idiot, but yeah, it's interesting because frankly, I did a ton of research for this. Like I have a spreadsheet up over here and I took all of the points that were scored last year and then the percentage differences between the wide receivers and the running backs and the quarterbacks and between the top, a QB1 and a QB2 versus a wide receiver. And I got all that done and I'm like, I don't know any more than I did, I think, before I started. So hopefully you can help me out and all the information that you have researched is distilled a little bit because I'm not sure I got it. So let's just start in on it, I guess. From the basic question we want to answer, I guess, to start is how exactly do you determine the value, of a rookie quarterback in a Superflex league? How do we even find that? What do we do to find that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of benchmarks that you want to look at with fantasy football and in Dynasty, you have these players over a couple years. And so within 1 year, within 2 year, within 3 year, if they're not hitting certain marks, then you're holding out forever and hoping that they're going to turn into something. Like at this point, we know who Sam Darnold is. Like, does he have a chance to start a couple games for the Vikings? Sure. But he didn't hit certain marks as a Jet. And so you kind of knew it wouldn't work, at his next stops. Like, even though with the Panthers, he had some weird rushing touchdown outlier moments. But the point is, you can kind of see what these players need to do. And when we factor in draft capital and in Superflex leagues, the quarterbacks that are taken early are the guys that are taken the early first round, the NFL draft. It's all these guys, the Trey Lance, it's the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, all these guys early in drafts. It makes sense that they would go there in a Superflex league. But a lot of times when you think about Superflex, meaning you're going to probably start 2 quarterbacks. And I did a poll recently on Twitter. It's like 90% of the time plus, that's what people are starting. It's not really a start-sit decision unless you have injuries or a bye, but you're starting 2 quarterbacks. The second quarterback, a lot of the time I've found, is more of a floor play. Like you look at a quarterback that you're plugging in there, and a lot of times it's the Derek Carrs of the world or Russell Wilson, those kind of players that, like, yes, they had the starting job this past year, but did they really help you for fantasy? And you go through the games and you're like, I started Derek Carr every week. That did not help you in a Superflex league because you were not making up the point differential and you really didn't have those ceiling moments that you want from quarterbacks. So I guess for me, it comes down to how are you building your team in a dynasty league? And in Superflex, you would love to have 2 studs. Everybody would love to have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and just lock up the Superflex position. It just doesn't happen that way. And so in a rookie draft, the hit rates are a lot lower than people realize. And even if guys have a starting job, like Trevor Lawrence is entering a moment where we're like, okay, this is it. They're going to pick up, they're going to work on a contract extension, but through this time, through 3 years, you're like terrible the first year. I mean, historically bad, good rebound the second year. And then we kind of didn't see really much of anything of a ceiling despite having the 4th most dropbacks in the league. So you get a floor with some of these quarterbacks because the teams have a really long leash, right? Like the teams are willing to say, we're going to give these guys 2-3 years. But it's actually not helping your team because the value of these players actually fluctuates more than you think. Like Bryce Young, there are people that took him in a rookie draft last year. 102. Some people I know came to me and said, I took him at the 101 because it's a super flex and I had to take a quarterback, and they passed on Bijan because they felt like they had to. When you look at the value of this player, I mean, nobody's trying to trade for Bryce Young unless they're being really cheeky, trying to get a really good deal on a player. So the valuation of the players that you're often passing on are wide receivers that certainly hold their value a year later, and I think are a better way to build teams. So for me, it's a roster construction issue, and it's a misunderstanding of what quarterbacks actually do score when you're putting them in your QB2 or Superflex spot.
Yeah. And I think the point, I don't know if the word is point differential, but when you're talking about elite numbers, you mentioned Allen and Mahomes. The guys at the top are very much so at the top, and especially Allen last year scored an absurd amount of points. And I was trying to figure out percentage-wise all of that, and I don't know if I learned anything, but I learned a lot, but I don't know if I came away with a lot of conclusions. But like the difference between the number 1 scoring quarterback last year, which is Josh Allen, and number 12, was like a 32% difference in points scored. And the difference between 1 and 23 was about 60%. So I don't know the whole, and then like the average percentage. I don't know how are you figuring out? Well, let's move on, I suppose, to just you sent out a tweet regarding that Dynasty rookie mock draft. Regarding the overall value of QBs in rookie drafts if we're overvaluing them.
Yeah.
Could you explain that graph a little bit to me? Because you were kind of trying to figure out like points per game and similar type of things that I was in, but I think you did a better job of it. So help me with that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I looked at every single quarterback over the last decade that was taken in a Superflex league. And what I found is that only 5 of them started every single game as a rookie. Okay. And what I wanted to do was just kind of see, like, if somebody got the starting job and they started 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like they actually eventually were worked and not like a Jordan Love situation. Are they effective for fantasy? And effective, I said, as are they started in a 1 quarterback league, or are they top 12, in any format? And it's kind of half. Like, it's in the first year, you're getting a 50% hit rate over the first year, and then into the second year of a quarterback that just gives you 1 season. Okay. Now think about it. It's not just what do they score, but in a dynasty league, what is the valuation? Do people want this player? Can you flip them for more? Are they gaining value over time? That's in Superflex. You can have a quarterback that you draft highly and then they gain value. Like same thing with Mahomes. It's not just you drafted Mahomes in a Superflex league. It's like he is now the most important player, or Josh Allen's the most important player in Superflex. So the valuation's there. All of the rookies who put up that number in their rookie year, like if they hit top 12, they stayed there. So if they were good as a rookie, they probably were good the second year, except for Baker Mayfield. If you remember, that Browns team was a massive, massive disappointment. But not just that, the quarterbacks that have hit a really elite, like the Josh Allen type numbers that we care about, it's more of like, a third of the teams. 37% is what I had. So what I've found is that when you are taking these quarterbacks early in your rookie drafts, you really are hoping to get an elite player. And really 2/3 of the time, it's just not. So it's more of a question to ask yourself, the wide receivers are there or the quarterbacks are there. What's a better hit rate for elite players? Who's going to hold value? And it's not just in fantasy. Like NFL teams get this wrong. Look at early quarterbacks. We just saw teams move on from Kenny Pickett, Justin Fields. Trey Lance is barely in the league. Like Zach Wilson. All of these guys, the NFL thought they were worth an early pick. And then in your dynasty league, you probably thought they were worth an early pick, but the hit rate was even lower. So a lot of times we look at fantasy as like, it has nothing to do with the NFL. They know what they're doing. Like, no, the NFL also gets these things wrong all the time. Fantasy has a terrible hit rate. Trust me. Like, this is my job. And I look at, prognostication. It's like, if you hit 50%, you're awesome. But in the NFL, it's just as bad. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these rookies. It's actually a lower hit rate than we think to be elite.
Yeah. And so I guess with that information, how do we determine the value difference? Because the hit rate is higher with, you mentioned wide receivers. So, and this year's a great year for that. So we'll keep that as the thing we kind of use as a metric. How do I determine then, okay, let's say my wide receiver hits. My wide receiver hitting is not as good as if like my quarterback were to hit in a super flex league, but my chances of a quarterback hitting are a lot lower. So how do I weigh the chances of them both hitting versus the value of one versus the other hitting, if that makes any sense?
It does. I think at the end of the day, every team is its own ecosystem. When you're drafting a team, if you're already past your startup and you're in a rookie draft, you're looking at your team and saying, okay, do I have at least one stud quarterback? And for me, that's all I really need in a super flex league. I need one guy that I think can hold value over time and can hit that top 6 type number. So then I look at my rookie draft and ask myself, like, is this person that I'm pairing my second quarterback that I think also has a truly elite ceiling, or am I just drafting a guy just to have another quarterback? I've found that a lot of people feel forced into taking quarterbacks that are often their QB3s. And another stat I share all the time is over the last decade, 1/3 of the league turns over their quarterbacks every single year. Like what I found is that 11.3 teams every single year have a different starting quarterback in week 1 than they did the year before. It's just we have so much tunnel vision, all of us included, that we look at what's going on and we can't really look back and go, what was I thinking a year ago? It's like you just keep moving on and we don't learn from our mistakes when it happens every year. 10 plus teams every single year. It's going to happen. We went through on our podcast, we just did a Superflex ranking show, and we went through all 32 teams and just kind of said, okay, is this quarterback going to be the quarterback a year from now? And we kind of went through the list and we ended up at 11 teams that were like, it's up in the air. And then there's going to be teams that we did not see it coming. We didn't think that the Broncos could break free from Russell Wilson's contract. They found a way. And there's other teams like that. Like Derek Carr's owed a lot of money. Derek Carr can easily be moved on a year from now if the things don't work out. The teams are really good, especially the Saints, by the way, at like doing gymnastics around the salary cap. So it's more fragile than you think, your second or your third quarterback on your roster in a super flex league. So I tend to not want to build that way. I don't want to build my team around a position where I'm reaching to get floor numbers. I mean, Trevor Lawrence might have looked like a really good quarterback one. He was taken in the first round of Superflex startups this past year. I mean, people were saying Trevor Lawrence is my franchise guy. Trevor Lawrence was a floor play this past year, and you built your entire team around it because you felt like you had to have a quarterback. When these wide receivers, they gain so much value. They have a long shelf life. There's a reason in startups like your CeeDee Lambs, Amon-Ra, all these players have skyrocketed in value over the years as opposed to the opposite where it's like, are they going to hold on to a job? Like CeeDee Lamb was going to get a second contract. He better get one right now. He's due a lot of money, but
yeah, the Cowboys, you never know what they're going to do with that. I got to talk with Kyle Yeomans again about that and see why they're not paying him yet. But yeah, I mean, your point, I think, is well taken. I was looking through things, and last year, I don't even think we had 23 quarterbacks that started more than 12 games, I think it was. I mean, I think we had about 23 quarterbacks that started 12 or more games. Somewhere around that. There was some injury, obviously. You got like Burrow and Cousins and things of that nature. But, I think that's a good point. I was looking at here. So my first year, for instance, for some context for people, my first Superflex rookie draft was 2018. And whether because I just got lucky or I was somehow seeing into the future, I mean, that's the year for people who don't remember. Baker Mayfield was taken 2 overall behind Saquon. You had Josh Rosen at 4. Sam Darnold at 5, Lamar Jackson at 6, and then Josh Allen all the way at ADP 17.
He fell in a lot of drafts because people couldn't see it, and I get it. Like I couldn't see how it could work.
Yeah, and like so this is kind of anecdotally, just if you look back the past couple of years, the reality is if you're taking a guy in the top couple of quarterbacks, you're probably going to be wrong. Like you said, you got lucky if you're like a 35% hit rate, I think is what you said, or somewhere around there. And the guys who do hit half the time are well behind, like Jackson and Allen. And then 2021, we saw a similar thing. Like you mentioned, Lance, Fields, Mac Jones. Most of those guys aren't on there. Lawrence is the only guy on his original team out of those guys right now. So, it's a scary prospect. So to kind of apply that to this year, and feel free to flesh this out as much as you are or aren't comfortable with, because I want to push people to your podcast. Everybody should check that out anyways, and to your written content. But this year we had 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Obviously with Michael Penix Jr., even though he's taken top 8, he's fallen a little bit in drafts, mostly into the second round. And people, with the Falcons, and which you're a fan of, so I'd be interested in your take there. But how do we apply what we've been thinking and talking about then to this year? Caleb Williams is going at 1. Then this is ADP pulled from DLF May mock drafts for anybody who's curious. You got Caleb Williams at 1, Marvin Harrison Jr. at 2, then Daniels, and then Neighbors, and then May, and then Odunze, McCarthy. So in the top 7, it's a quarterback, receiver, quarterback, receiver, quarterback, receiver, quarterback, and then a couple of guys and Nick's down at 12, rounding out the first round. Do you feel like that's appropriate value? Would you be more averse to taking a quarterback that high, say especially May or McCarthy?
A lot of it is team dependent. Like I cannot fault anybody who has nobody at QB2 and they're just like, I have to have somebody. So I am going to take Jaden Daniels over Neighbors because they just say to themselves, like, I see the upside if he's, I don't know, 80% of what Lamar Jackson is. Like you would take that if you knew that right now. Obviously we're looking into the future, but I think when I look at constructing my rosters and I look at teams, I hopefully already have one stud quarterback on my roster that I can count on. Having 2 is a really, really great thing, but the hit rates on these top end wide receivers like Marvin Harrison and like Malik Neighbors, I think are just so much higher. And then a year from now, they have a chance to be even higher because they can be alphas on their team. So I'm not just looking at my team and team need. I'm looking at value in a league. And do I want to trade these guys away? No, like I want them on my team forever, but I also can look at my team and how it bolsters it. I found that in the Superflex leagues that I have, I don't want 2 wide receivers. I don't want 3 wide receivers. I want 5. I want 5 wide receivers because I want I want to start, them all the time in my flex. And at the end of the day, I can also pummel people with these wide receivers where a lot of teams are trying to make do with these flex type guys that are never going to offer the same ceiling. And so I'm going to take my shot in the early first round over wide receivers. So I would personally take Marv over Caleb. I won't fault anybody that want to, but I would have Marv at 1, Neighbors at 2, then Caleb Williams. And then it's a toss up between Odunze and Daniels based on team need. I think the McCarthys of the world are where people get a little I don't quite understand pushing McCarthy up the board that much because he's a quarterback. When a lot of times these kind of guys end up being QB2s or QB3s for your roster. Like I think McCarthy does have some upside. The comp that we've been given a lot is he's Alex Smith with a more live arm, and people forget Alex Smith went number 1 overall and had some good fantasy seasons. Even the season before Mahomes, like he had some good fantasy appeal. But if you knew you were getting that type of career from somebody that's a longtime starter and has maybe 2 to 3 seasons that really matter, is that really like going to push the needle over a wide receiver? Like if you knew you were drafting Amon-Ra, you would be like, I'm getting that. Like I'm getting the production. Someone's going to get, 100 plus catches a year. That's kind of what you could see with Neighbors. He's going to be an alpha for this team. He's going to command targets, and roster construction wise, you can make it work. I mean, I put out a tweet asking people in your Dynasty Superflex League, who are the winning quarterbacks? And it was every combination you could ever think of. Like there's names that showed up at the top, and we've had some people do some research on Sleeper. It was Josh Allen, Hurts, Dak, and Purdy as the most popular ones, which makes sense, right? They killed it, and they killed it at the end of the year. But then it was a hodgepodge of other quarterbacks: Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, who went on a run, Baker Mayfield, Sam Howell. You can make it work. And so I personally have found that I'd rather scrap and claw and have the willingness that if I have an injury, I'm going to play a wide receiver. I don't feel terrible about doing it. It's okay. You'll survive. When, yes, you might get 14 points out of Derek Carr sometimes, or Jacoby Brissett, but it is not changing your league the way that you think it is just because you're starting a quarterback.
Yeah. I would, just because you keep mentioning these guys like Howell and Purdy and Hurts, obviously those guys are kind of in 3 different categories at this point in their careers. But if they won you that league last year, I'm curious. We should look at some point, if you haven't already done it, because you've done so much research on all this type of stuff. But how many quarterbacks that are top 12, top 24 quarterbacks from a general startup ADP or something like that were ever drafted in the first round of rookie drafts ever? Because Hurts, I don't believe, ever was.
No,
and neither was Purdy, of course. And we already mentioned Josh Allen as well. So. And I don't think Patrick Mahomes was. I think you mentioned he wasn't either on your Twitter. I was looking
in one quarterback leagues, he fell. In Superflex leagues, he fell as well because people didn't see it, they didn't understand, and they knew he wasn't going to start away. So it's the over assumption of saying this player I draft will be a difference maker when the list is there's Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Herbert. Tua's been good. I wouldn't say great consistent wise. And then you kind of look at the rest of these guys, someone's like, I'll take Paxton Lynch in the first round because he's a quarterback. Carson Wentz has been up and down. Teddy Bridgewater, all of these names that you just kind of banked on, and a lot of them just didn't show it right away. And even Burrow, I have a running joke about Burrow because he's a franchise quarterback. He deserves it. Go look at his logs through fantasy because it has been actually way more maddening and less consistent than you think. He got off to a terribly slow start this past year where he was last in the league in completion rate through the first 4 weeks, turned it on, gets hurt, got hurt his rookie year. He's basically had 2 years where he was really good and 2 that didn't matter. So you'll take that, but it hasn't been as, life-changing, the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, they're rare. And there's a reason all these other teams have so much turnover.
Yeah, and even Patrick Mahomes has lost some value recently with the way that they've been performing on offense as well. So, to put it in a little bit of context for everybody, then I guess so. We got a question on our Ask Me Anything, and I'd have to go back to actually check what Matt's response was, our content manager. But we were asked this in Superflex PPR, for what it matters, 6-point passing touchdown. Don't know if that will or won't have an impact here. So 6-point normal is 4.
Changes me nothing.
Okay, same for me, but that's good to know. Okay, would you take JJ McCarthy at 106 or Rome Odunze? My quarterbacks, so here's the context, are Herbert, Love, and Carr. I have a pretty strong wide receiver room as well with Puka, Ayuk, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, JSN, Reed Flowers. So got a pretty good wide receiver room and a pretty good quarterback room. Who are you taking, McCarthy or Odunze at 6?
This is a slam dunk Odunze because you would be drafting McCarthy to be a QB3 at best on this team. You have Herbert, you have Love. So you have two really, this is a really good team already. You have a Carr if you need him. But I mentioned Derek Carr so many times. He's finished between QB13 and QB20 every single year of his career. And he's never helped the team. You could stream Derek Carr. He was really, really good the last 4 weeks of the season, but Derek Carr is a perfect QB3. You don't need to trade for him, but if he's on your team, it's fine. These are the type of moves that I see all the time where people feel like it's a super flex. I should, but you're drafting a player to be a floor bye week fill-in or injury fill-in. It's actually not a ceiling play, but a year from now, Rome Odunze, one, Keenan Allen could be gone. Yes, you have DJ Moore on that same team, but he could ascend in value. He could ascend where next year, he puts up a good rookie season, but then next year, even if he farts around, sorry for saying it that way, but if he doesn't do anything, let's just say Rome Odunze puts up 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. You'd be like, man, I wasted that pick. He will not lose value heading into next year. It's the same thing we're seeing with players. We will give them a free pass, and he's attached to a young quarterback. So then the narrative you could easily spin is, well, in year 2, we know we're going to see the breakout. And that's the worst case scenario. I think if I said 504, you'd be like, that's terrible. What if he goes for 1,008 and you have somebody who is just, skyrocketed in value? And if you want to flip him, he's worth even more. You could flip him for, JJ McCarthy and a first, next year. That's kind of thing. So it's a difference between a outcome of safety, which a lot of players play in Superflex, and an outcome that also includes a real high ceiling. I like McCarthy. I have him in a Superflex roster, but to me, it's with that roster, it's no choice. You're taking the wide receiver.
Gotcha. Yeah. I like to hear that because I tend to agree. Maybe it's a little bit of fulfilling prophecy because I tend to agree with you, Dynasty show, and then I invited you on. But I like the way that you're thinking about that because I do think it is pretty counter cultural, I guess, in the Dynasty community, especially in Superflex, like we've been talking about.
Yes. And I'll just be honest, that's part of my personality is to ask a question, be like, why are we doing it this way? Because I think a lot of people have an inherited thing that because they're in a Superflex league, they heard it from somebody else and they've never really dug into. Now, it's not perfect. This isn't just saying don't take quarterbacks. You need them to win your leagues. And it's just really hard to trade for them later. So I find that when I stockpile wide receivers, I have something to trade, and then I'm willing to piece together. So if I have a stud quarterback, I'm going to do it and move forward that way. But I want Jaden Daniels on my team. I want Caleb Williams on my team, but I just value those other guys so much more.
Yeah. Especially like you mentioned with the loss in value, chances are a first round rookie wide receiver is not going to lose a ton of value, even if he has an abysmal, first year. You were able to trade Burks somehow, probably last year if you wanted to, even if it was a bit cheaper, but he didn't crater as much as Bryce Young did probably. So, in fact, I'm upset at my friend who just made a trade away. He traded both Jamison Williams and Burks away and managed to get something legitimate for it. So you can still do it in year 3. If I told you that Drake May was not going to start this year and he may not start until game 10 or 12, I don't know how much you think that's reasonable. How much does that impact his value? Because we have 2 guys with Michael Penix and Drake May, Penix especially, but I think people are assuming that Drake May is going to start relatively soon. And yet it is hard to keep first-round quarterbacks on the bench, but the Patriots are not a good team. They are doing what they can to surround May with pieces. We just heard yesterday Cole Strange, their center, is probably going to be out for a while. And he started all the games, I think, that he's been available for, but he has not been what we were hoping for. And beat writers Phil Perry and Tom Curran, especially, I really like them. They believe that the assumption is that Jacoby Brissett's going to start and Drake May is not. And they went through recently a whole, like, what's the most likely game for him to come in? And just based on how their schedule works, there is a somewhat realistic possibility that he wouldn't be starting until relatively late in the year. How much does that change the value for you?
Yeah, one of the markers that I usually look at for a quarterback is they need to start 9 games as a rookie. I found that is a threshold that if you're doing that, it means one, you didn't get injured, but you played enough as a rookie to show something. Like Tua didn't play the whole year, but he showed enough. Deshaun Watson didn't play the whole year, got hurt, but he showed enough. You need to be able to hit a certain threshold. So week 10 feels a little later than what I would want to see out of Drake May. And I'm also a big Drake May fan. I think the tools are there. But when you look at the surrounding weapons, like that is an issue with quarterbacks. It's the most dependent position of the 4 main offensive ones for fantasy, where the context matters because you have to throw to somebody else. Like it's not just dependent on yourself. So with Drake May, I think I feel comfortable. It's kind of a coin flip for me. I like May more than McCarthy, but I don't blame anybody if they take McCarthy over May because of the situation. I don't think it'll plummet what he is and what he can be. I do think, though, that this team and the way that they've kind of pressed reset on everything, throw him in the fire. Like throw him in there, let it go. People can learn from their mistakes. Different quarterbacks, by the way, like they've done studies, other people have, of certain quarterbacks have responded well when they've been thrown in, and other ones need time. And Mahomes sat the entire year, except for that last game. I don't know. It's more of a team building, perspective of the GM and the coaching staff of like how they want to build this team. And also there's the other aspect of, do they want to suck to get a better draft pick? Yeah. So I think value wise, he's still going to be steady. It would almost be worse though if he does start and he pulls a Bryce Young for dynasty value and this team has no weapons. I mean, that's the other route for him, is that everybody around him, this offense can't move the ball. I mean, Bryce Young had one of the lowest yards per attempt ever for a rookie quarterback. It plummeted his value, and people saw that, and now nobody wants him. With Drake May, the tools are there, and the playing style, the kind of Josh Allen, like sometimes like, what are you doing with the ball? But, oh, wait, this is a really good play. That kind of stuff translates to fantasy. It just gives you a wider range of outcomes than I think Bryce Young had.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting. And that's something we'll be monitoring, because I think the assumption is definitely that he won't be starting the year this year. And so we'll hope to have to see him get on the field soon. Real quick on the last guy taken in the first round, Michael Penix Jr. there at 8 to the Falcons. Obviously that was clowned a lot in the media and such. But right now, again, according to the DLF ADP that I was looking at, he is being taken right ahead of wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who went in the first round to the 49ers. Pearsall, to me at least, feels a little bit more like the likely contributor long term, and also possibly sooner, just with the nature of Kirk Cousins' contract. How do you feel about, like, I feel like this might be a perfect example. What do we do with a guy who may not be starting for a couple of years, but if he Jordan loves, he could be super valuable eventually?
Yeah, I wish I had a really good thought out answer and a qualified answer. One, I'm a Falcons fan, so disregard anything I say here. But two, I think at the end of the day, there's not a right spot for Michael Penix in a Superflex draft. I think I would take him more at the back of the second round, but I don't fault anyone that says, hey, in the middle of the second round, I want to take a stab and see what he is in a couple of years. Like, you just don't count on him to be anything more than a QB3 or 4 for your team. And yeah, that's a nice luxury to have, where you're not really thinking about that. So I think it can work. I also am very against anybody that thinks they're the smartest person in the room. And I think that's what the Falcons management is trying to do here. Terry Fontenot And the guys are like, well, we want to be so far ahead of everyone else. I just find when you find the guy who's the smartest, thinks he's the smartest person in the room, he's not. And they think they're outwitting the entire league. And so that as a fan, but also as just like somebody who scrutinizes opinions about how teams build, that terrifies me. It terrifies me when you are leveraging short-term stuff and long-term stuff at the same time. Like, it's not just a long-term play. It's not just a short-term loss. It's both. And that scares me only because our team only knows the worst pain ever.
Yeah, I wonder what the odds are on the GM being around by the time Penix gets his
That's
first
the thing.
start. I don't know.
That's he's banked on a lot of stuff, and I'm clowning on the Falcons because I'm a fan, but like, it can work. But there is a possibility and a range of outcomes where he's not even around for this. I think the coaching staff will get at least 2 years. If they colossally fail and they're division favorites right now, like, he's gone after this year. He's gone after the next year. Like, it's a kind of a 1 to 2 year window, and that's how the business works, though.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking about the business, we've got a lot coming up here. We've had a lot of news come through recently, the past couple of days, with OTAs really kicking off here. I wanted to ask you, before we let you go quick, what particular positional battles, rookie specific or otherwise, are you monitoring as we go through OTAs, but mostly once we get to training camp, as we know that's kind of when the real battles, as it were, kick up?
Yeah. And I gave you guys a shout out earlier, but you guys aggregate so much. Puka news last year. Puka was someone we talked about on our podcast. And then the steady drumbeat was, Sean McVay thinks that, this guy's awesome. Cooper Kupp's giving praise, but also he's stepping into a lot of these. And so for me, I look at teams where I like the scheme. Like, I like this team. I like them offensive mind, what they're doing. And then there is some vacuum of, there's not a number 2 target here. So that's why Puka last year made sense when I was getting the reports, from these different beat writers. It's like, okay, well, who's the number 2 receiver on this team? Van Jefferson, not scared of him. So it's like, those are the kind of guys that I really look at. So I think Buffalo's the big one on everyone's mind of like, who's going to lead this team in targets? I would bet on Dalton Kincaid, but wide receiver wise, you could make a case for 6 guys, and Mac Hollins might be making a case for himself. It's not Mac Hollins, I'll tell you that. But those are that's what I'm thinking of. I really like, and I'm keyed in on Baltimore's backfield, because after this year, I don't know what it is. And Rasheen Ali is a guy they took in the 5th round that I think could wiggle his way into a bigger role, with Keaton Mitchell kind of recovering and just an undrafted free agent. Justice Hill's in the last year. Derrick Henry's in a 2-year deal, but really it's 1, and we'll see. And then it's Rasheen Ali is the only other guy. So that's like, I want to see if he gets trusted more and more, because he had a crazy college production at Marshall. That's one that I'm really thinking about. The Saints are weird. I don't really know who's their wide receiver 2. It's supposed to be Shaheed, but he doesn't profile as a possession wide receiver. He's also not a huge blocker. So is it A.T. Perry? Is it Cedric Wilson? Is it Bub Means, who we call Bub Means Business is what we call him. But those are the kind of guys that I'm really interested. Denver, the Denver tight end room. Is it Greg Dulcich? Is he alive? Is he a thing? Because his hamstrings aren't, but he played 2 games this past year. But I like Dulcich. But Adam Troutman is like a Sean Payton guy. So anyway, that tight end room, I'm like, is Dulcich being used, or is this like kind of like they don't care about the tight end anymore? So those are a couple that are on my mind.
All right. Yeah, that's excellent stuff. The Baltimore one, I think especially, is piqued my interest because Ali was a guy that I really liked coming in, like at the Senior Bowl. He was there for a day and ended up with a bicep tendon injury. Yeah, and so I don't know if he would have gone any earlier or not. He should be relatively healthy by the time that we get into the season. So at least according to the injury guy that I was talking to. And yeah, I like that opportunity there. And I think he's going pretty under the radar in most places.
I mean, he went undrafted probably in your rookie drafts. He's probably a 4th round pick. But he's one of those guys after the draft that you scoop up, you put him in your bench. If you have a taxi squad, that's where he lives. and you figure it out later. So yeah, I love players like that you can see an opportunity, probably not this year, but you can see how the seas are going to part in 2025 for him.
Yeah. Well, hey, Kyle, I want to let you go here. I told you 40 minutes, and we're right at that mark right now. So I really appreciate you joining me, and thanks everyone who was watching and listening. Remember to check out Kyle on the Fantasy Footballers DLF and Dynasty podcast that he hosts over there, as well as, of course, on the fantasyfootballers.com. Don't forget to check out our website as well. Use that code podcast for 50% off. Getting a lot of signups recently. Make sure you aren't left out. For Kyle Borgognoni and the rest of the 32 Beat Writer team, I'm Zach Haidu. We'll see you later.